My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at Owen's phone, the bright screen searing the horrific truth into my mind. The messages were unmistakable, sweet nothings and explicit details that could only be meant for one person, his lover. "Hey babe, can't wait to take you out tonight. I've got a surprise planned." I felt the blood drain from my face as reality crashed down upon me. My husband, my partner of 12 years, was having an affair. The phone slipped from my trembling hands as a tidal wave of emotions threatened to drown me. Shock, anger, devastation. I'm not sure how long I sat there, numb and motionless, before the sound of Nathan's laughter from the backyard jarred me back to the present. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I willed my racing thoughts into focus. I couldn't confront Owen, not yet. This required a more calculated response. Retrieving his phone, I quickly deleted the damning thread, removing any trace of my discovery. No, Owen would not get off that easily. If he thought he could betray me and simply walk away, he was gravely mistaken. My mind whirred as the initial panic gave way to cold determination. I knew what I had to do. First, I needed evidence, concrete proof to dismantle every lie he would inevitably try to spin. Second, I required a plan to secure mine and Nathan's future, protecting us from the fallout of his reprehensible actions. I dialed the only person I could trust with such a weight. "Ella? It's me. We need to talk." By the time Owen returned home that evening, my game face was firmly in place. I smiled and played the doting wife, all while mentally cataloging his every move, his every casual lie. He would soon learn that betrayal came at a cost, and I intended to make him pay dearly. Over the next few days, I kept my ears priced for any information that could aid my cause, maintaining a cool front despite the storm of fury raging within. Scouring his emails, texts, and any other electronic trails, I slowly pieced together the sordid details of his affair, my hatred for this Jenna intensifying with every revelation. I also began meticulously documenting his indiscretions, ensuring I left no stone unturned. Legal counsel, separate bank accounts, updated beneficiaries, no precaution was too small in securing a future for Nathan and myself, free from Owen's corrosive influence. With Ella's assistance, I bided my time, allowing Owen to slip further into the web of his own lies as his actions grew more brazen. All the while, I steadily constructed an impenetrable case against him, turning his selfish misdeeds against him. One way or another, he would atone for his sins. Soon, the veil of deceit would be lifted, and only then would Owen comprehend the true consequences of betraying the person who knew him best. The day of reckoning was coming, and I would be ready. Over the next few weeks, I worked methodically to reshape our routines, gradually removing any ties that could impede a clean break from Owen. Little by little, I redirected finances into a secure account, paid down joint debts, and revised legal documents. I even switched Nathan to a new school, one closer to Ella's house, just in case. Owen, the oblivious fool, remained utterly clueless to the approaching storm. His arrogance left an increasingly blatant trail of evidence, received gifts inexplicably appearing around the house, furtive phone calls at all hours, shady rendezvous disguised as working late. I diligently catalogued every infraction, every despicable transgression. One afternoon, I caught him in the act, hunched over his laptop, having what he thought was a private video call. "You'll never guess what I have planned for this weekend, baby." He purred in that sickly sweet tone that made my skin crawl. "A cozy little bed and breakfast up in the mountains, just you and me." I pressed record on my phone, allowing his tawdry words to permanently etch his deceit before clearing my throat loudly. Owen startled, panic flashing across his face as he scrambled to minimize the window. Too late, I had bore witness to the truth yet again. "Oh, hey, hon." He feigned an innocent smile. "Just a work call. You know how it is." Rather than confront his pathetic lie, I simply quirked an eyebrow and strolled away, anger simmering beneath my calm veneer. Let him leave the increasingly transparent trail. It would only further damn him when I deployed my reckoning. A new fire lit within me as I doubled down on my efforts. I knew the law would side with the wronged spouse, especially with the cache of evidence I had diligently compiled, but it never hurt to stock more ammunition. With Ella's help, I left no stone unturned, drilling into Owen's email accounts, financial records, anywhere even the faintest trace of impropriety may lurk. And lurk it did. Jenna's name appeared again and again, a scarlet A woven through loan applications, withdrawals, even several Negley employees' reports that Ella managed to unearth. Piece by piece, I unraveled the tapestry of lies he so carefully attempted to shroud, revealing their affair for the umbrella of selfish deception it truly was. Meanwhile, Owen's behavior at home grew more erratic, more careless. Perhaps sensing the calm before the storm, he seemed determined to cram in as much debauchery as possible. I lost count of the evenings he stumbled in late, reeking of that trashy perfume, or the hushed phone calls held in parked cars. It was almost insultingly blatant. Through it all, I maintained a veneer of plausible deniability, tenderly caring for Nathan while shrouding my intentions behind a facade of wifely naivety. Let Owen openly frolic with his mistress. It would only make the sting of his consequence more brutal and well-deserved. Part of me couldn't wait to obliterate the life he thought he knew, to crush every bit of shameless arrogance that allowed him to so brazenly spit in the face of our vows. Soon the predator would become the prey, his infidelity dissected and upended for all to see the ugly, selfish core lurking underneath. I knew the road ahead would be painful, that curveballs and complications surely loomed just out of sight. But I refused to go down as the meek, jilted wife weeping from the sidelines. No, Owen's betrayal required a firmer hand, and I would be the one to deliver his penance with surgical, unwavering precision. Licking my wounds in private, I steadied my nerves and hardened my resolve. Judgment awaited, and I would be its ultimate arbiter. As the weeks ticked by, more layers of Owen's deception began to unspool. Diving into our financial records, I discovered he had been steadily siphoning funds from our joint accounts into a separate, hidden stash. Thousands of dollars, drained to bankroll his escapes with that vile woman. The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. Not only was he betraying my trust in the most unconscionable way, but he was robbing from our family's future, from Nathan's potential inheritance, to fund his deplorable indulgences. I felt utterly violated. Thankfully, I had kept meticulous documentation of every fishy transaction, every bit of evidence that could be leveraged against him. With Ella's guidance, I began quietly setting up my own off-the-books account, diverting what I could salvage to ensure a stable financial future for Nathan and myself, independent of Owen's selfishness. Ironic, I thought bitterly, that he would inadvertently teach me such an invaluable lesson about contingency planning. As if his monetary depravity despicable enough, I soon uncovered an even more gut-wrenching layer of Owen's betrayal. Amidst my impassive surveillance of his communications, I came across a galling string of messages between him and Jenna, each more repulsive than the last. "You know this can't go on forever, right?" Her artificially sweet words practically oozed through the screen. "If you ever want us to have a real future, you need to do the right thing and leave that family of yours behind." My heart plummeted into my stomach as I absorbed the full extent of her arrogant, cold-blooded manipulation. So that was her insidious game. She hadn't just set her predatory sights on snagging Owen for a fleeting dalliance, but had been systematically working to obliterate our entire lives. The worst part was, his responses seemed to be tacitly encouraging her suggestions. In that moment, I was gripped by an overwhelming protectiveness over Nathan. I refused to allow that shriveled snake of a woman to slither her way into destroying the sanctity of his childhood, of the life and values I had so lovingly nurtured. If she wanted a battle, she had just initiated a war she could never hope to win. I redoubled my efforts, drilling down on every last intersection of their sordid involvement. Deleted messages, calendar invites, receipts, all betraying a torrid breadcrumb trail deliberately hidden in plain sight, as though Owen reveled in parading his indiscretions behind my back. With Ella's assistance, I began compiling it all into an ironclad damning dossier, one that would ensure I emerged victorious. Meanwhile, as Owen's duplicity intensified, so did my efforts to lovingly insulate Nathan from the turmoil lurking under our roof. We spent quality time together each day, baking, doing arts and crafts, lavishing in the simplicities of the mother-son bond. Deep down, I drew strength from his innocence, from the bright future I was determined to preserve on his behalf. "Mom, can we go camping this summer?" Nathan asked one afternoon, all smiles and unbridled hope. "You, me and Dad?" My heart clenched at the thought of Owen tainting such a special tradition with his perverse dishonesty. Forcing a reassuring smile, I pulled my sweet boy close. "Of course we can, baby," I murmured into his hair. "Maybe somewhere extra special, just you and me." Owen couldn't be allowed to tarnish Nathan's horizons any longer. As his transgressions piled up, so did the fortifications around the family he had shattered beyond repair. Guided by Ella's pragmatism and my own unflappable discipline, I arised the art of sustainable vengeance, quietly assembling the battle plan that would neutralize every last threat he posed. Our future security was nearing weight off the deceptive life he had so recklessly constructed. Once the dust settled, Nathan and I would emerge vibrant and victorious, utterly insulated from the toxicity of Owen's rebounding misery. Soon, all would be laid bare, and that wretched mistress of his would learn the steep price for ruining the sanctity of my family. With my defenses solidifying, it was time to take the offensive. I knew divorce proceedings would be inevitable, so I began consulting with a ferocious bulldog of a lawyer that Ella recommended. Sitting across from her imposing desk, I methodically laid out the comprehensive paper trail, documenting every last one of Owen's indiscretions. "I want to pursue an at-fault divorce on grounds of adultery," I stated flatly. "He needs to be held fully accountable." The lawyer's eyes widened as she examined the mountain of evidence, hard numbers, screenshots, incriminating images. Finally, she let out a low whistle of impressed disbelief. "With a case file like this, he won't know what hit him," she stated grimly. "We'll bleed him dry." Her cold calculation was strangely reassuring. For too long, I had been at the mercy of Owen's betrayal. Now I would be the one dictating his misery. Meanwhile, Ella had been working her own angles to demolish the worm's life on a professional level. Through her investigative prowess, she uncovered an insidious pattern surrounding his mistress, a systematic seduction of married colleagues from the bottom rungs all the way to upper management. Jenna wasn't just a callous homewrecker, she was a calculating workplace huntress. Armed with undeniable proof of her penchant for unscrupulous affairs, Ella began feeding anonymous tips to her employer's human resources department. Suddenly, the veneer of professionalism that Jenna had so carefully maintained began to disintegrate before her. I could only imagine the fear that started lacing Owen's messages to his mistress as gathering storm clouds of scrutiny began closing in on their indiscretion. Would he finally start to feel the shred of anxiety, the paralyzing uncertainty that I had been forced to endure for months? How delicious it would be to watch his world slowly implode while remaining utterly powerless to undo his own vile undoing. I refused to simply sit back and gloat, however. With the lawyer's guidance, I pressed forward in surgically separating myself from any legal or financial liability stemming from Owen's recklessness. Name was to be stripped from property titles, accounts relisted under just my name, every entanglement cauterized with precise intention. Like a gifted angler, I indelicately removed every barb and hook he had carelessly strewn across my life, one squirming tug at a time. "Don't leave any strings dangling," the lawyer warned. "He'll try desperately to bleed you dry as leverage, so cut off all potential sources." I just smirked back at her, utterly undaunted. That foolish man had already revealed the boundless depths of his depravity, his staggering capacity for selfishness and indulgent stupidity. Did he really think I would blink at his pathetic intimidation tactics now? Oh, how exquisite his underestimation would be. Every day, it seemed, unearthed a new layer of Owen's perfidy for me to coldly dismantle. The shady real estate holdings, mail-order dalliances, messy digital footprint, all irreversibly preserved as damning exhibits in his upcoming humiliation. With each dossier I compiled, each revelation of deceit and betrayal, my appetite for retribution grew insatiably ravenous. He simply had no idea what sort of Pyrrhic victory he had unleashed upon himself. Fool that he was, he could never fathom the depths of my capacity for determination or discipline. Where he remained pathetically encapsulated by the incessant neediness of his cowardly id, I was rapidly evolving into an unstoppable force of nature, a consummate, merciless juggernaut of wrath. I would become the arbiter through which all of his despicable transgressions would finally and irrevocably be judged. As Owen remained blessedly clueless to the swirling vortex of exposure rapidly encircling him, I continued preparing the pieces for our fateful reckoning with practiced calculation. Let him wallow obliviously in his cesspool of lust and faithlessness a while longer. The phantom freedom he was deludedly indulging would prove all the more suffocating once I fully seized the reins of his torment. His future belonged to me now, as much as he had willfully orphaned himself from mine, and the path ahead for him was looking increasingly unavoidably bleak. With each passing week, the tsunami of Owen's consequence gathered more unstoppable momentum. The HR complaints against him and his mistress had bloomed into a full-fledged corporate scandal, with whispers and dark looks trailing their every move through the office halls. "I can't believe we've been working alongside those kinds of people," I overheard a coworker mutter in hushed tones. "It's just sordid." Owen may have remained oblivious to the rapidly disintegrating ground beneath his feet, but there was no masking Jenna's increasingly frantic demeanor. I watched with perverse satisfaction as the weight of her self-inflicted ruin seemed to physically age her before my eyes. "This is spiraling out of control," her text to Owen became increasingly shrill. "We need to get ahead of this now." "Relax, babe. It's just office gossip," he attempted to soothe her, the smug dismissiveness in his words stoking my hatred. "I'll smooth everything over. Just keep your head down." The arrogant delusion was almost pitiable. Owen remained utterly blind, like an obliviously cheery denizen wandering into the heart of a steadily encroaching minefield. Any day now, his world would detonate in an apocalyptic deluge, decades of deceit and selfishness finally withering under their own morally indefensible weight. While he buried his head in the sand, I continued systematically dismantling every last lifeline that could possibly serve to buoy his retreat. One by one, through calculated-rized planning and Ella's expert assistance, the few friends or family members who may have provided shelter from the coming storm found themselves gradually, neutrally estranged. Like a twisted, violent magic trick, I made his entire world silently dematerialize around him, all without lifting a finger towards direct confrontation. Having thoroughly excised Owen's cancerous influence from my life, I turned to focusing on preparing Nathan for the seismic shifts ahead. Though still painfully unaware of the grotesque betrayal unfolding around him, my son had become increasingly unsettled by the underlying tensions now frayed our once idyllic home life. Evening meals were spent shooting me questioning looks while his father hurriedly choked down food. Outings felt increasingly strained and awkward, like wool being pulled over our eyes. "Is everything okay with Dad?" Nathan finally asked one night as I tucked him in, his brow furrowed with childhood worry. "He seems different lately." Steadying myself, I stroked his soft cheek and offered my most reassuring smile. "Everything's just fine, baby," I soothed, surprised at my own believability. "Grown-ups go through some changes sometimes, that's all, but you'll always have me, no matter what." My son seemed to accept the placation, snuggling deeper into his blankets with a relieved nod, but his words cemented my determination to steel him for the unavoidable turbulence that loomed ahead. For too long, Owen had been eroding the steadfast center I had fought to keep our nuclear family intact and happy. It was finally time to excise that malignancy. Over the following days, I took great care to lavish Nathan with affection and quality time, striving to create joyful memories that could fortify him through the trials ahead. We went for nature walks, visited museums, rewatched all his favorite movies nestled on the couch, anything to insulate him in a warm domesticity wholly segregated from his father's self-inflicted turmoil. All the while, I could practically feel the crosshairs of impending confrontation slowly fixing themselves on Owen's oblivious form. Like the peak of a terrifying roller coaster's first dip, we were nearly suspended at the calm before the plunging maelstrom, the decisive reckoning which he had unconscionably forced to this point. I had assembled an overwhelmingly damning dossier of evidence, stripping away every layer of his depravity through documentation and cold pragmatism. Restraining orders, asset protections, childcare provisions. Nothing was left unfortified for the coming siege of his unleashed mania. All that remained was to deftly lure Owen into the kill zone, then riddle him with the merciless barrage of justice he had brought up-rakening upon himself. Scattered amidst the zeal of my preparations, I caught flashes of the woman I had once been, tempted to abandon this increasingly dark path out of some withering self-preservation. But they never lasted. My identity was permanently arc-welded to this white-hot meta-wingity and finality of purpose. There could be no equivocation, no half-measures remaining, only a sudden, blinding dawn terminating this wretched season of deception, paving the way for the hard-won renaissance awaiting for Nathan and myself. Owen's day of judgment had nearly arrived, and I was ready. With the final pieces locked into place, I summoned Owen home for our inevitable reckoning, a terse text demanding his presence. He likely assumed I wanted to rehash marriage counseling or some other fruitless attempt at reconciliation. Little did he know I had long abandoned any notion of preserving our lawfully wedded privation. When he finally sauntered through the door, I was seated stoically in the living room, a thick manila folder containing his compendium of sins resting coolly on the coffee table before me. As instructed, Nathan was safely ensconced at Ella's for the evening. This fallout would be far too toxic for young eyes to witness. "Hey, hon, you wanted to see me?" Owen's voice held a twinge of confusion as he made his way towards me, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation. With a steely glare, I slid the dossier across the table towards his approaching form. "You might want to take a look at this first." The instant his fingers opened the folder, dread instantly washed over his features, panic seizing his body. For several torturous moments, my husband rifled through the damning evidence with shaking hands, incriminating photos, blasphemous texts, philanthropist money trails. Every dirty secret, every web of adulterous malfeasance I had so meticulously compiled over these agonizing months, all finally laid bare before his ashen face. "Lila," he finally sputtered, eyes brimming with pathetic, unshed tears. "I don't know what to say." "Don't bother," I coldly interjected, unmoved by his woebegone theatrics. "Your actions have spoken volumes already. I'm done playing pretend, done swallowing the lies. Our marriage is over." The words seemed to slap him in the face, his jaw going slack with dismay. Good, let him marinate in the consequences of his selfish treachery for once. "But you can't be serious," Owen blubbered in disbelief. "After everything we've been through, we can work this out. I know we can. Just tell me what you need, Lila. I'll do anything." I gave a derisive snort at the absurdity of his blustering, utterly unmoved by his sniveling pleas. "You've already shown me exactly what you're willing to do. Lie, cheat, steal, utterly betray the very sanctity of our vows without a single shred of remorse, all to indulge your tawdry fling with that viper of a woman." My words hung heavy in the air, both of us fully aware that I was referring to his mistress, Jenna. His momentary hesitation said it all. Pathetically, his first instinct had been to attempt disassociation from her, the cowardly worm. "That's over. I swear," he backpedaled, desperation mounting. "Completely, totally finished. This was all a massive mistake. You have to know that." "A mistake?" My voice was a razor at his throat. "You don't get to play revisionist with your ugly, drawn-out patterns of infidelity and depravity, Owen. You made your bed, woven tightly with deceit and moral atrocity. Now you get to lie in it." On cue, punctuating the finality of my statement, the front door creaked open and my lawyer entered, manila folders clutched in her manicured grasp. She stalked over and deposited them squarely on the table next to the teetering stacks of Owen's documented sins. "Mr. Hendricks, I'd suggest carefully reviewing and signing where indicated," she intoned professionally. "Mrs. Hendricks has secured a very thorough judgment on your behavior." Owen gaped like a fish, frantically flipping through the sheafs of legalese as tears began to openly flow down his crumbling face. Every protection, every contingency crafted during my Prague-wing exit strategy now fell ruinously into place around his buckling form. It was beautiful, utterly vindicating justice. This can't be happening," he whispered numbly, Pelagian at the sheer immensity of his forfeiture. Finances, property, probably even custody if I pressed based on his philandering rap sheet. His shattered eyes finally lifted to meet my own, perhaps for the first time in years, truly seeing the remorseless diamond-plated version of the woman he had so carelessly betrayed. In that moment, I allowed every last acrid plume of rage and disgust I felt towards him to bore into his shrinking soul. "Start getting used to your new reality, Owen," I spoke softly, each word dripping avec menace. "This is the bed you've made, and I'm just getting started in returning that favor. In the days following my explosive confrontation with Owen, a strange, almost giddy calm settled over me. As I watched him desperately attempt to untangle the legal straitjacket I had so tightly bound him in, I felt utterly at peace, like a skilled surgeon having cleanly excised a malignant toxicity. "This is outrageous," he railed to my lawyer during one meeting, motioning wildly at the divorce terms. "You can't just take everything. What about my career? What am I supposed to do?" The shark-eyed attorney barely batted an eye. "Frankly, Mr. Hendricks, you should count yourself lucky you haven't been charged with criminal misconduct, given the evidence. I'd suggest complying and avoiding any unpleasant escalations." Unable to restrain my satisfaction, I allowed a faint smirk to crease my lips as the impotent bluster drained from Owen's face. I'd handpicked this aggressive legal Rottweiler for her reputation in devouring entitled adulterers. Let him choke on the bitter taste of his abject humiliation for once. While he flailed and floundered in a desperate bid for basic traction, I focused my energies on more positive pursuits, namely ensuring a smooth transition for Nathan. With gentle age-appropriate conversations, I steadily ushered him through the realities of our new reality, careful to insulate him from any unnecessary toxicity. "Daddy has made some grown-up mistakes," I explained carefully, cradling my son close. "Ones that mean we won't be living together as a family anymore. But you'll always have me, and I'll always keep you safe and happy. I promise." To his immense credit, Nathan seemed to accept the situation with surprising grace and resilience. Perhaps the underlying frictions in our home had been more transparent than I'd hoped. In any case, with the cancerous influence of Owen's toxicity expunged, I could already sense my son's lightening spirit, unshackled from the poisoned air he had been unwittingly inhaling for far too long. As for Owen, his pathetic attempts at reconciliation and mercy fell on deafened ears. I caught glimpses of his mewling voicemails, increasingly anguished texts pleading to meet, reeking of desperation, but I simply forwarded them to my lawyer, refusing to indulge his predictable histrionics for even a moment. He had chosen to selfishly discard any goodwill or decency between us. Now he could drown in the withering consequences. On the work front, Owen's life continued its inexorable implosion as his seamy conduct rapidly became laughingstock of the office. I almost pitied the wretch when Ella shared footage of him being perp-walked out of his workplace, cardboard box overflowing with personal items and millennial career relics clutched limply to his chest. Jenna could be seen slinking off in the background in a paroxysm of self-inflicted embarrassment. "You're finally getting what you deserve," Ella told me with a satisfied nod. "Both of you miserable snakes." I merely shrugged, suddenly self-conscious of the depth of my friend's loyalty. Truthfully, I held no grudge against Jenna anymore. Her petty, shriveled existence had already transformed into its own searing punishment, her prospects permanently cauterized by the wildfire of scandal she helped spark in her singular lust and weakness. Owen, however, he would never escape the full, crippling weight of my disdain and fury. Not until his dying day, spent groveling through the rubble of all he had destroyed through his arrogance and weakness. I would gleefully ensure it. With each passing milestone, the house transferred to my name, Owen's unceremonious loss of custody and privileges, his reputation left a smoldering crater of scandal. The vice around his flailing existence only tightened. The man I had once loved, the father of my precious child, had willfully transformed into an amoral, lust-addled parasite. This systematic unraveling was the only poetic penance he had left himself susceptible to, and I was the merciless architect and keeper of his regenerating torment. My only regret through the entire process, if you could call it that, was my failure to capture the look on Owen's face as the final divorce papers were shoved across the table for his signature. The abject, hopeless capitulation. I committed that image to memory with savage intensity, a permanent brand searing the depth of his unforgivable transgressions into my very soul. If he had any delusions of earning leniency or a shoulder to cry on, they were emphatically snuffed in that moment. I stood impassive, muscles taut and unyielding as the granite monolith I had become, unmoved by his pitiful, shuddering pleas. After all, he had made this bed, and he would lie in it forever. As the ashes of our immolated relationship cooled and scattered to the winds, I turned to embrace my radiant future with renewed determination. Nathan and I would not merely endure in the wake of Owen's ruination. We would flourish, heroically emboldened by the sheer ferocity of my love. The next chapter, wholly devoid of my cancerous husband's toxic influence, beckoned brilliantly. With the divorce finalized and Owen permanently exiled from our lives, an incredible weight seemed to lift from my shoulders. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could breathe easy again, unburdened by his insidious deception and selfishness poisoning the very air around me. Gone were the furtive glances over my shoulder, the gnawing doubts needling my subconscious. The pathological menace that was my former husband had been banished. In his place, stretching out ahead of Nathan and I, shone the inviting path of a fresh start, a life finally free from that emotional malignancy. My son, in particular, seemed to blossom in the weeks after Owen's departure. With his father's erratic, deflating presence no longer clouding our home, Nathan emerged a sunny, vibrant version of himself that I had feared was being slowly smothered. He laughed more, played with an unbridled joy and innocence, and seemed to walk taller, almost as if subconsciously relieved to be rid of an unseen burden. I knew he still harbored questions, childlike confusion about the intricacies of why Dad was no longer around. But I allowed those doubts to dissipate naturally through the simple pleasures of being present as his single, doting parent. Our bond deepened in ways I hadn't realized were possible, a nearness forged through the shared triumph over adversity. In many ways, I found myself rediscovering my own identity as well, reclaiming the woman I had been before the toxicity of Owen's influence took insidious hold. Gone were the feeble insecurities he had so skillfully preyed upon, replaced by an almost feral self-reliance, an unwavering confidence in my ability to nurture and provide unaided. Of course, I would be lying if I didn't admit to still harboring a vicious streak of resentment towards my ex-husband. Try as I might, I couldn't seem to fully excise him from my thoughts, my perceptions of the world now forever being filtered through the lens of his ultimate betrayal. Mundane tasks like checking the mailbox or reviewing finances seemed to dredge up visceral flashes of that sickening sense of violation and embarrassment upon realizing the full extent of his cheating and squandering. But I refused to allow those ugly feelings to corrupt the fresh, vibrant horizons stretching out before Nathan and I. If anything, they reminded me of the revitalizing decision I had made to sever that dead weight and provided Flint's striking motivation to diligently maintain our freedom lest we stumble into a backslide. As for my actual encounters with Owen, well, they were bitterly limited to polite but emotionally distanced co-parenting obligations. I could sense his desperate yearning for any shred of warmth or nostalgic connection during the frequent custody handoffs, his eyes silently pleading for an olive branch or moment of levity he had long forfeited any right to. But I had meant what I said, that bridge had been napalmed to cinders, nothing remaining to rehabilitate. After the unspeakable transgressions and indignities he had subjected me to so callously, he would forever be immediately dead to me outside of the most rudimentary procedural dealings. No amount of sniveling or feigned remorse could ever hope to erase the scars he had inflicted. So while Owen was left to wallow in the wreckage of his selfish debauchery, a ruined career, an ostracized social life, even restraining orders keeping him at a safe distance from me and his former workplace paramour, my focus remained squarely ahead on forging the brilliant futures we had so narrowly reclaimed from his morass of lies. With Ella's support and encouragement, I slowly let down my guard, began embracing all the wonderful possibilities unfurling in this new dawn of independence. One key step was resurrecting my long-ignored graphic design passion into a full-fledged career, pooling my settlements into launching a thriving online business that allowed me the perfect work-life balance as a newly minted single mother. It was deeply validating, watching my creative hunches blossom into success while remaining ever present for Nathan's needs. Almost as if the universe itself was rewarding my perseverance and sacrifice, gently restoring the dignity that Owen had so malignantly leached away. From there, it was almost frighteningly easy to let the light back into our lives, our household brimming with renewed vitality. I founded a women's support group to empower other divorcees who had faced similar trauma. We took vacations abroad, soaking in new cultures and perspectives as antidotes to Owen's provincialism. By all metrics, we were genuinely, effervescently happy in ways that had eluded us throughout that entire dark chapter score of marital imprisonment. Looking back, it was hard to believe there had been a time when the pall of Owen's toxicity had settled so insidiously over us all. My memories of that miserably wasted purgatory already felt like dissolving fever dreams, ephemeral delusions overwhelmed and exorcised by the blinding truth that had set us free. Nathan and I had been given an almost implausible second chance at living our lives to their fullest potentials, one I vowed never to squander in exchange for mere complacency or jadedness ever again. My son would grow up seeing the true depth of a matriarch's inner steel, and the infinite power that comes from making the impossible choice to stand upright and walk towards the sun. As for Owen, well, the less said of his own diminishing existence, the better. I had moved on from that stunted, ignoble chapter, devoting what precious energy remained towards cultivating the two flames now burning bright before me. My son was my shining future, but my scorched redemption was entirely my own.
My spouse, Jonathan, abruptly recommended that I return to my parents' home, even though they were already living with us, and I was shocked by this. I was taken aback by his unexpected revelation, and yet he appeared to think he was acting quite rationally. "Do you have a problem with that?" he questioned plainly. "Avoid arguing with me. If you have a divorce, that's okay with me." I had my complaints about his recent chilly and distant behavior. Although I had thought about getting a divorce myself, I didn't think it was appropriate for him to evict me from our house. "I'm the one paying $3,200 for our expenses," I said to myself. "Is he even aware of that?" He became irate and yelled, "Leave this house now," as I stood there in shock. "You won't be welcome here, according to my folks." Though I didn't comprehend the reason, I gave in. "Okay, I'll take all my belongings with me once I can." With a look of satisfaction, he answered, "Then do it," and turned to go. I got in touch with a store to sell my stuff. I'm Lisa, and Jonathan, who is 3 years my senior, is my roommate. Our initial casual meeting turned into a whole day spent together, thanks to mutual connections. Jonathan told me that he wanted to be a voice actor, and his rich voice really spoke to me. Calm tones have always appealed to me. We swapped numbers and made plans for further dates, so it appeared that he was attracted in the same way. Without ever holding official talks, we soon found ourselves in a relationship almost by accident. When we first met, I had just received my college degree. I began working and dating someone with a little bit more life experience when I graduated from college. Jonathan was excited. Our 3-year age difference worried my friend Laura, but I reassured her it wouldn't be a huge deal. I wasn't concerned because I actually liked Jonathan and sensed his devotion for me in return. Laura eventually warmed up, believing my assessment. It was after 2 years of dating when Jonathan brought up the topic of marriage. My parents were excited to see him and had high expectations for our future after I had told them about him, even his age. I used to wonder when he would pop the question, and it happened to be on one of his frequent visits to my flat. We were just relaxing and having fun together. It wasn't the most romantic scene, but I was okay with it because it was very much in line with Jonathan's approach. I said, "Sure, let's get married," in response to his proposal. Maybe we both had a relaxed approach to the whole event. After the proposal, we went to each other's parents' houses. I didn't feel at ease with Jonathan's family, though. When we got to his parents' house, the interior design appeared fake, despite having pieces that mimicked traditional luxury. His parents gave off the impression that they were trying too hard to be wealthy because they were wearing expensive clothing and ostentatious jewelry. We seemed to have quite diverse likes and morals. Therefore, I didn't think we would get along. It hurts that Jonathan's mother even made a derogatory comment about my appearance during the visit. The way the family of the man I wanted to marry behaved surprised me. But in the end, I had to tell myself that Jonathan was my commitment, not his family. Jonathan and I, who are getting married soon, told ourselves that I wouldn't have to spend a lot of time with his parents if I didn't particularly enjoy their company. I decided not to let this concept bother me too much. As we were getting situated into our new condo after the wedding, I saw that Jonathan was clearly obsessed with something. "Hey, who was that woman in the blue dress at our wedding?" he said abruptly one day. I wasn't able to identify the person he was referring to right away because there were other people wearing blue. Asking, "Which woman in a blue dress?" as I tried to remember. "You know, the one who gave a speech as your best friend," he clarified. "Are you talking about Laura?" It dawned on me that Laura had on a blue dress, so I responded. "Yeah, that's her," Jonathan responded, sounding a little uncomfortable. "What's wrong with Laura?" I asked, perplexed by his worry. "Oh," he said, "it's not a big deal. On my way to work the other day, I thought I saw someone who looked like her. That made me think that she had spoken at our wedding and was your best friend." Jonathan's abrupt interest in Laura and his agitated reaction puzzled me a little, but before I could ask more, he laughed it off and went back to his room. Laura called me shortly after we spoke, and she was very excited. "Listen, Lisa, my boyfriend's coming back to Canada next year," she confessed. Having known one other since they were young, Laura and her boyfriend had been together since high school. He had moved away while she was in middle school, but they kept in touch via letters, and in high school, he confessed his emotions for her. "I've always enjoyed Laura's romantic tales," I said. For a few years, her lover worked at an overseas branch, but they were still able to maintain a close and solid connection. With excitement, she wondered, "Well, do you think he might propose once he's back?" "And then you guys will get married?" I half laughed, partly exclaimed. "Oh, Lisa, you're always jumping to conclusions," Laura said, laughing. "Make sure I'm invited to the wedding, please. I swear I'll deliver another moving speech." "Obviously, I need you to make a speech as lovely as you did at my wedding." We laughed together as we sipped our tea, relishing the trust and ease that permeated our chat. Just don't set the bar too high. Whenever one of us encountered a problem, the other two of us were always there to support the other. It was at this point that I noticed Jonathan's routine was changing. He started coming home from work later and later, and is still working late now. "Yeah, you think I shouldn't work or something?" I inquired one evening. "I'm all right, like I told you," he shot back. "It's always preferable to have more money. Just don't share your thoughts with others." Jonathan had grown aloof. He didn't even call me by name anymore. Jonathan and I were married, and he's been calling me just you, but I thought he would talk to me more often and kindly. But his remarks were frequently critical. His drinking had escalated dramatically, and his once gentle voice had gone gruff. Given that voice actors required a healthy voice, it was troubling that at times his voice even sounded hoarse. In spite of this, he avoided talking to me more and more and didn't appear interested in talking about his health. He eventually stopped paying any attention to me, even in the same room. Laura called me in the middle of these difficult circumstances. I recommended that we get together, as she indicated she needed to talk about something crucial. I was ready for a talk, given my concerns. We decided to meet at a cafe, a type of private seating area. Laura chose our booth carefully, a spot from where the counter and staff could easily be seen from the door. "You chose this room specifically?" I asked, noticing her cautious approach. "Yes," she replied. "I wanted a spot where the staff could see if there was a suspicious person outside our door." "A suspicious person? Is that related to what you wanted to discuss?" I queried, connecting the dots. Laura nodded, her expression tense. She explained that she had felt like someone was following her ever since she left her job about a month ago, and now she even felt watched on her days off. The reason she picked a room with a clear view was that she suspected the person stalking her might try to eavesdrop on our conversation. "Did you talk to the police about it?" I asked, concerned. "I tried, but since there's no direct contact, they can't do much," she sighed. "What about your boyfriend?" "Isn't he coming back in a month?" I inquired, hoping she had support. "I thought I'd discuss it with him too, but I wanted to first talk to you, someone close by," she explained. I understood her need for immediate support. Laura hadn't managed to get a clear view of her stalker, making the situation even more unnerving. She was too frightened to discern whether her stalker was a man or a woman. I decided to discreetly watch from a distance to try and identify who was following her during this time. I was struggling with my troubled relationship with Jonathan and found it hard to open up about it. But as I kept an eye on the situation, I made a shocking discovery. The person shadowing Laura was none other than my husband, Jonathan. Jonathan often claimed he had to work late, but I noticed that after his shifts, he lingered near Laura's workplace and followed her as she left. I was stunned to realize that the person causing my best friend such fear was my husband. Witnessing Jonathan tracking Laura with a creepy, unsettling grin completely changed my perception of the man I had married. The man I had fallen in love with now seemed like a stranger, and the love I thought would last forever turned cold. I knew I had to tell Laura the truth. I urged her to move immediately for her safety. With the help of her colleagues, she arranged for someone to drive her from the underground parking lot directly to her new residence. We took these precautions to ensure her safety as Laura made her escape. Jonathan's frustration intensified. Eventually, his pent-up anger erupted. "My parents are going to live here, so you need to go back to your parents' house," he demanded abruptly one day. I was taken aback by his sudden and unreasonable demand. "If you have a problem with that, then I'm fine with divorcing you," he threatened, losing his temper. Though I had my grievances and had even considered divorce before, the reality of our deteriorating relationship hit me hard at that moment. I couldn't believe that Jonathan thought he could just kick me out of our home. After all, I was the one paying $3,200 for our monthly expenses. I wondered if he even remembered that as I gave him a skeptical look, but he just snapped, "Just leave already." "My parents can't move, and if you're still here, why do I have to leave? I don't understand at all," I said. Despite my confusion and frustration, I calmly replied, "Okay, I'll take everything I bought with me." Seeing me agree, Jonathan impatiently told me to hurry up and walked away. I immediately contacted a local buyback service, and the next day they arrived at our apartment. At first, Jonathan smirked, thinking I was simply packing to leave. However, his smirk faded into shock as he watched the workers evaluate all our furniture and appliances. Once they finished, except for the items in Jonathan's room, a staff member handed me a quote. "The total value is $299,000. I quickly signed off. "Okay, sell it all." Suddenly, Jonathan snapped back to reality and grabbed my arm. "Why are you selling everything? My parents are going to live here. How can they if there's no furniture?" he asked. I shook off his grip and countered, "What do you mean?" "When we got married, you told me you were broke because you were paying for your acting classes. You asked me to handle the rent, furniture, and living expenses. I never knew you were that broke. I feel deceived. Remember the $3,200 I've been covering every month? From now on, you'll pay that, and with your parents moving in, I bet it'll be even more." Jonathan became pale when he realized how serious the situation was. He tried immediately to gather himself. "You believed that by discussing money, I would end the divorce? Who believe you to be?" Posing, he said, "I've already gotten close to a rich lady." But then I recalled how Jonathan had been keeping tabs on Laura lately. If he thought that was approaching, then he had seriously misguided perceptions. Laura hailed from a well-to-do family. Her father was a businessman, and her grandpa was a businessman as well. She never showed off her money. She did not live by her family's wealth. Instead, she was just like myself and our friends. However, it appeared that Jonathan had become aware of Laura's past and considered her a better fit, possibly due to the belief that riches could make one person more desirable than another. I was furious at the idea, but I also knew Laura would never be into Jonathan. She had been dating her high school sweetheart for years, and he was going to return to the States shortly with intentions of getting married. Jonathan was shocked to learn that Laura thought Jonathan was weird, and that their relationship wasn't close, when I explained that Laura felt nervous since someone had been following her around every day. "You're lucky I didn't call the police," I snapped back. However, I was unaware that she was dating. He hasn't been around. "She chose me over someone she doesn't know," Jonathan attempted to defend, misinterpreting the nature of their connection. Since childhood, they have exchanged letters and communicate virtually daily. In contrast to you, who has only held part-time employment, her partner has success. He's liked by her dad, too. As I presented the facts, Jonathan appeared extremely depressed, I observed. It was obvious that his fantasies about getting close to Laura were simply that, dreams. Hard reality was beginning to sink in. He looked a little relieved as people came to grab our stuff. "You're basically all I have right now." Trying to look unfazed, he asked, "You'll always support my dream of becoming a voiceover artist, won't you?" I looked back at him sharply and said, "Sorry, I've already started the divorce process. From now on, we should speak with each other through our attorneys." Jonathan clung to me, maybe thinking I still had feelings for him. "Avoid saying that." He begged, "Haven't we been getting along all this while? Getting along? You've been aloof from my closest friend Laura ever since you found out she's affluent, and shortly after our wedding, you started hanging out with her." That's when I understood I had erred, I went on. Jonathan started sobbing. Though he was older, I found his mischievous sobbing much less endearing. I could no longer stand him in my presence. "Enough," I said angrily. "Additionally, I've told your uncle about the divorce. You are aware of his toughness. He's determined that you will work for him. Thus, I can no longer encourage your aspirations to become a voice actor. As it is, you hardly ever practice. Maybe it's time to face facts and move on from Laura, or else I'll contact the cops." I turned away after saying my last words, vowing never to look back. I would remain with my parents for the time being, but if I found a good place, I would think about moving closer to my place of employment. Jonathan, meantime, fulfilled the prediction and went to work for his uncle. His parents, who were all employed by the uncle, moved in with him as well. They anticipated being financially dependent on him following his marriage to Laura. It seemed that taking advantage of others ran in the family. I was relieved to get out of that hazardous situation. Although age wasn't a big deal, I promised to be pickier about who I dated in the future. Happier news. Laura invited me to her wedding after we resolved our differences with Jonathan. She introduced me to her boyfriend of several years, and I sincerely hoped they were happy. My husband cheated on me 2 years ago, which led to our divorce. His younger sister was the object of his liaison. I received an invitation to their wedding from them as well. I felt like my mother had misled me too when she claimed she would be at the ceremony. "I'll do something fun. Just wait and see," she then said to me. I'm Ava, and I had a scheme to make them both pay for it. I was my husband's supervisor at the same company where we both worked. Although he lacked complete reliability, he was amiable and genuine. It was my responsibility to train him and teach him the work. He was anxious about the new work at first, but we became close over time. "Ava, are you free on our next day off?" he asked me one day. His level of confidence outside the office startled and delighted me, making my heart skip a beat. We used to go out together after that. When we started dating 3 months ago, he said, "Ava, will you be my girlfriend?" Other managers complimented him as he had improved greatly in his work. "Ava, will you marry me?" he asked me after receiving a promotion and moving to a new department. With pleasure, I concurred. Our wedding went well, and my parents and younger sister Lauren hit it up with Scott right away. Scott and Lauren, who were the same age, hit it up right away. She often stated, "You are so lucky to marry such a kind man like Scott, and it looks like people at work have high expectations for him." Lauren had just broken up with her fiancé and seemed to be yearning for marriage, frequently expressing how jealous she was of me. After our wedding, I maintained working and taking care of domestic tasks, supporting Scott both at work and in our personal lives, or at least I felt I was supporting him. About a year after our marriage, Scott started arriving home later and later, and we hardly ever had dinner together. "Scott, it's been a while since we've discussed work. Is everything in order?" I inquired. "There's nothing wrong," he answered. "You've been arriving home late every day, though. If I am of any assistance, please let me know." "There isn't," he remarked, appearing irritated. He used to talk to me about everything, but lately he appeared offended when I brought up work. During his days off, he would either go outside to get some fresh air or sleep all day, claiming to be exhausted. I felt like we hadn't been spending much time together, so I gave Scott some advice. "Hey, Scott, how about we go to a spa together during next month's holiday? My sister recommended a restaurant to us." "A spa?" "Yes, it's a place where we can heal our body and mind from daily stresses at work," I explained. He seemed busy, so I scheduled a hotel reservation with the spa for him. 1 week before the spa excursion, I asked Scott, "What time should we leave the house next week?" "Huh? Oh, is the spa trip next week? I neglected to mention, I have to travel on a business trip next weekend." "What? But you've known about the spa trip for quite some time." "Well, it's work, so it can't be helped," he remarked. "Right, I see." Scott's department seemed to be busier than ever, with frequent business excursions. This time, too, I had no choice but to quit. Scott headed out on his work trip early in the morning, as usual. Well, I thought to myself, if everything had gone according to plan, we would have been on our way to the spa by now. While I was feeling sad, I got a phone call from the hotel where I had made a reservation. Despite having sent a cancellation email, it seems they did not receive it owing to an error, and they contacted us to confirm our arrival time. I thought I might as well invite Lauren. Lauren had left the house in the morning and was not coming home when I called my parents. I therefore made the desperate decision to take my mother to the spa. It almost seemed impossible that my mother could make it at such short notice, but to my surprise, she said yes. "Are you serious? Is it all right to leave Dad alone at this time?" "I'm more worried about you than your father," she added. She seemed to have decided to come along since she had noticed my recent low spirits. "Thanks, Mom. I should be the one expressing gratitude to you. I'm pleased to be able to have a trip with you." I wanted to enjoy the vacation with my mother, which I hadn't done in a long time. However, when we got to the hotel, we witnessed something shocking. "Mom, look at that!" At the hotel, we saw Scott, who was meant to be on his business trip. He was arm in arm with a woman, appearing joyful as they approached the hotel where we were meant to stay. The instant they entered the hotel, the woman with Scott turned her face in our direction for a moment. "You've got to be kidding," I thought. That woman with Scott was Lauren, my sister. After that, I was in a state of shock and don't recall anything about how I got home. After drinking some tea my mother made for me, my feelings gradually started to calm down. He had been misleading me. Not just Scott. I had also been duped by Lauren. After calming down, I contacted Scott's department. As I had expected, his department had been striving to cut their workload for the past few years, and they were not making employees go on business trips or perform any overtime as much as possible. When I told my mother about the days when Scott arrived home late or was on business trips, it turned out that Lauren was also not at home during those days. It was all starting to make sense. All those days when he came home late and said he was on business trips, he was actually meeting up with Lauren. When I learned the truth, anger welled up inside me rather than sadness. Mother, I'll divorce Scott. I don't want to see Lauren, so I won't visit the house for a while. She kept silent but understood my feelings. I prepared everything before Scott came back. I arranged the divorce papers, signed a new lease for a house, packed my belongings, and moved into an apartment where I could stay until I officially moved into the new house. I left the divorce papers and a letter for Scott at the house. All the details regarding alimony and such would be handled through my lawyer, as stated in the letter. I also blocked all his contacts. I didn't want Lauren and Scott to know my new address, so I didn't tell my parents. Since we worked at the same company, we occasionally passed each other, but I completely ignored him. Realizing how hopeless the situation was, he quickly agreed to the divorce. He didn't tell anyone the reason for our divorce, but our colleagues seemed to have sensed it and avoided the subject. 5 years passed, and I kept my distance from him and my family. One day, after finishing work and returning to my room, I found my mother standing in front of me. "Mom, what's wrong?" "I have something I want to tell you," she said, showing me an invitation. "This is from Scott and Lauren." It turned out that Lauren had left our family home and moved in with Scott. I thought they might get married, but I never expected them to have a wedding ceremony and invite our parents. "So, Mom, are you going?" "Of course I am," she replied. "I see," I said, feeling like I was the only one who couldn't forgive them. They must have known this, which is why they invited only our parents to the wedding. I had no right to say anything since I had distanced myself from both Scott and my parents. Seeing me depressed, my mother smiled. "Don't worry, I'm not going because I forgive them. Just you wait and watch." On the day of the wedding, my mother called me through a video call. "I don't want to see their faces," I said, about to hang up, but I remembered my mother's words and kept the call connected. The screen showed a slideshow that was being presented. The MC began introducing the slides. This slideshow was made by the bride's mother. She gathered photos from her beloved daughter's birth to the present and created this slideshow. I was surprised that my mother, who wasn't good with technology, could create such a slideshow. It brought back a feeling of depression inside me. "Mom, you did this much for Lauren?" But in the next moment, I was captivated by the screen. This isn't Lauren. The slideshow started with a photo of me when I was born. The MC continued, "So cute. There's a resemblance to Lauren somehow." As the guests watched with a relaxed atmosphere, Lauren's expression stiffened. The MC continued, "Since she was young, the bride has always been devoted to her family. She was a diligent student and succeeded in entering her desired university. After starting her job, she became a very reliable employee at the company." Lauren's friends and colleagues who knew about her student days and workplace began to buzz with excitement. "Huh? Is that a photo from the welcome party at university? Lauren didn't go to such a good university, did she? Hey, isn't that a photo from the company's welcome party? Wait a minute. Looking closely, it's completely different. Wait, if this isn't Lauren?" Scott also seemed to have noticed. "What the hell is this? This isn't Lauren." The MC, unaware of the bride and groom's pale faces, continued to advance the slides. And then she met the groom, Scott, at the company. According to the bride's mother, she initially taught and trained the groom as his instructor. Then the two got married. What followed were photos from my wedding with Scott. The MC couldn't hide their confusion, realizing something was wrong. The MC got quiet. At that moment, my mother took the stage and grabbed the microphone. "From here on, I'll take over and explain," she said smoothly while changing the slides. Even after marriage, my daughter supported him in both personal and professional aspects. However, due to how busy Scott got, he couldn't find any time for her, so my daughter planned a spa trip to help relieve his stress. "Wait, please," Lauren said, her face pale, and Scott made frantic attempts to stop my mother. But she continued with the slides. The next photo showed Scott and Lauren entering the spa hotel together, looking very close to each other. Finally, the bride and groom appeared in the photos, and both the MC and the guests fell silent. Scott declined the trip planned by my daughter due to a business trip he said couldn't be helped. My mother said, her voice steady and strong. "He had to go on a business trip for work, so my daughter invited me to the spa. That's where we saw his affair." When my mother said those words, everyone started to talk and buzz about what she had revealed. "Huh? An affair? And this wedding is for Lauren and Scott, right? Could it be that this wedding is based on their affair?" To answer the guests' questions, my mother continued slowly. "Scott swore to marry my beloved daughter Ava and make her happy, but instead, he betrayed her. To make matters worse, he cheated on Ava with her own sister, Lauren." "Mother, stop it already. Today is my wedding day. Why won't you celebrate my happiness?" Lauren cried as she tried to stop our mother. Still, my mother coldly looked at Lauren and said, "I have always wished for your happiness, but you've ruined it." First, Ava always considered not only herself, but also the happiness of her family. What about you, Lauren? Have you ever thought about how much Ava would be hurt by your actions? "Well, she always seems so happy. It's not fair," Lauren responded. "So, instead of being happy for your family, you just got jealous, huh?" my mother asked. "Mother-in-law, please stop. She is your precious daughter too, right? If that's the case, can't you celebrate our new beginning? Why are you doing this?" Scott pleaded. "I don't want to become a family with someone as dishonest as you. I saw it clearly at today's ceremony. If you really intend to start something with Lauren, why didn't you invite a single person from your own company? If you're going to have such a grand ceremony, shouldn't you apologize to Ava? It's selfish to invite me and her father to the wedding without making any effort like that." "But Ava has been ignoring me all this time," Scott protested. "Of course she has. After what you've done, it's only natural," my mother replied. "But that's all in the past, isn't it?" Scott argued. "Do you think her wounds will heal in just 5 years? Do you think you can regain our trust in such a short time? Don't be ridiculous," my mother said. After those words, my mother angrily left the venue with my father. I could hear my mother's voice from the cell phone. "The reason for your divorce. Did you see that, Ava?" "Yes," I replied. "I'm sorry for reminding you of painful things," she said. "I just can't stand seeing those two act like nothing happened." "No, thank you. I feel relieved. It's like you said everything I wanted to say." "That's right, Ava. You always keep everything to yourself. I thought it was too kind of you not to tell your colleagues the reason for your divorce." After that, my mother sent me the recording of her conversation with Scott during the wedding. As my mother said, even if time passes, it's not easy to forget. Moreover, Scott showed no signs of remorse, calling it a thing of the past. I decided to start my second life by giving Scott a proper punishment. I chose to do it during his presentation at the company. It was open to volunteers from various departments, so I quickly signed up and entered the conference. When it was Scott's turn, his supervisor, unaware of his remarriage, said, "Scott, you seem even more motivated today because you just got married." "Yes, I will do my best for my family," he replied happily. He should have known I was in the room, but he didn't. I became even more determined and played the recorded audio I received from my mother. The participants were surprised by the sudden noise, but as they learned about his affair with my sister after marrying me, they began to accuse him. "Scott, didn't you say that the reason for the divorce was a difference in values?" someone asked. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. "Oh, really? Did you say something like that? Well, I can't understand a value that involves cheating with your own wife's sister." I apologized for mixing personal matters into this important presentation. I have decided to quit as of today. I endured it because I liked this company, but I cannot bear to be in the same place as him any longer. Just as I was about to leave, the board members intervened to stop me. "Wait a minute, Ava. You're an essential asset to our company. If someone should leave, it should be Scott." "Huh, but me? I've been expected to have a promising future," Scott protested. "We had expectations in the past, but lately, you've been wearing worn-out clothes and you're not focused. It seems like you've completely lost the problem-solving abilities you had before. We're not expecting a lot from you anymore," they said. Lauren, who had always been awful at housework and did little when she lived with her parents, became a full-time housewife after marriage. Apparently, she left most of the house tasks for Scott to undertake, even while he experienced challenges at work. I couldn't give Scott advice like I used to, and he started making more issues at work. The fact that he had cheated on his wife's sister spread swiftly inside the workplace, and his reputation went bad fast. Once regarded and seen as a rising star, he was now viewed with distrust and scorn by his colleagues. His reputation was further damaged when his job started to suffer and he committed more errors. At the following board meeting, it was determined that I would stay at the company, but Scott would be sent to a remote area. He was essentially being demoted, with plans to lay him off in the near future. The corporation couldn't afford to maintain someone who had produced so much uproar and problems. Lauren, who had been enjoying her life as a housewife with his money, swiftly abandoned him when she found out about the relocation. She shifted to another man without hesitation, thinking she could easily find another method to sustain her lifestyle. However, the man she chose turned out to be a typical freeloader. He had no employment and no desire, and he started living off Lauren's money without contributing anything. Now, Lauren is suffering from his obligations. She's urgently working 2 jobs, day and night, just to make ends meet. She's overworked and miserable, a long cry from the carefree life she had envisioned. She had hoped to move on fast and avoid the consequences of her actions, but reality struck her hard. As they say, what goes around comes around. Erroneous actions will eventually catch up with you. Seeing Scott and Lauren in such a state, I finally felt a sense of closure. As I observed them struggling, it dawned on me that their betrayal had finally brought about their demise. Scott lost his profession and reputation, while Lauren lost her affluent life. They both faced the repercussions of their conduct, and it brought me a sense of calm. I felt rejuvenated and prepared to begin a new life. I could finally move forward without the weight of their betrayal hanging over me. I was free to establish a future on my own terms, without the ghosts of the past holding me back. I focused on my profession and started taking on new challenges at work. My co-workers, who had seen me bear so much with elegance and bravery, backed me. I was given a promotion in appreciation of my commitment and diligence. It was a fresh start, and I was determined to make the most of it. In my private life, I started getting back in touch with former pals and meeting new ones. I became a volunteer and joined a local community group because I enjoyed being of service to others. These activities helped me recover my confidence and reminded me of the goodness in others. I also took time for self-care, researching activities I had neglected during my marriage. I started painting again, a passion I had always liked but had put aside. The creative process was therapeutic, helping me to express my emotions and find healing. Eventually, I even opened my heart to the prospect of love again. I went on dates, met new people, and learnt to trust again. It wasn't easy, but I understood that not everyone was like Scott and Lauren. There were wonderful, honest people out there, and I deserved happiness. As the years went by, I found myself happier and more fulfilled than I had ever been. The agony of the past had dissipated, replaced by the delight of new experiences and the satisfaction of personal growth. Scott and Lauren were distant memories, reminders of lessons learned, but no longer sources of misery. Their lives, on the other hand, remained to be shaped by the consequences of their acts. Scott never recovered his career, shifting from one low-paying position to another. Lauren continued to be mired in debt from her new boyfriend, keeping her in a never-ending cycle of financial hardship. Ultimately, I understood that leading a morally upright and compassionate life is the path to true happiness. Lingering misery is the only thing that betrayal and dishonesty can provide. I opted to live my life with honesty and compassion, and in doing so, I found the peace and pleasure I had been seeking all along.
Being an architect by profession, I was thrust into the unique position of being a bride on what was meant to be the most painstakingly planned day of my life. Everything about the wedding had been meticulously planned, right down to the flower arrangements and evening music selection. I had pictured the day as if it were a scene from a love story, where everything is overcome by love. My fiancé Tyler, an engineer who is well known for his direct and rational approach, and who is the ideal match for my creative side, nervously smiled as he waited at the altar. But as I made my way down the aisle, I saw that Tyler had a far-off expression in his eyes, almost like he was carrying a weight. I attempted to brush it off as just wedding jitters, but my anxiety only increased when I saw Tyler's mother, Betty, glancing at a neighbor while whispering in a whisper. She faked a smile and murmured, "You look beautiful," but her fake smile was evident in her eyes. Tyler paused tensely before saying, "I do," as the ceremony went on and the minister inquired if he took me as his lawful married wife. But there was no warmth in his eyes that I had always connected with those words. Betty got up during the ring exchange and proclaimed loudly that she had to record this moment, but her declaration sounded more like a warning than a celebration. When I arrived at the reception, Betty made a mocking comment about my unusual attire, implying that I was breaking some sort of rule. In an effort to keep things lighthearted, I responded that I didn't see any reason to precisely follow tradition because I considered weddings to be celebrations of love. Tyler's attempt to defuse the situation was consoling, but it came across as resigned, which was inappropriate for such a joyous moment. Tyler and I danced together robotically as we started our first dance, our bodies near, but our spirits far apart. It seemed odd, the song that was supposed to be our love anthem. The distance felt wide and uneasy when Tyler asked if I was ready for forever. I said in the affirmative, against all odds believing that the ominous cloud hanging over us would soon part. I was unaware, though, that this was just the beginning of a string of difficulties that would put our marriage to the test and make me face my true self. Even as we all raised a glass to our new beginning, there was still a persistent feeling that something had already ended. Returning to our comfortable 4-bedroom house, which was supposed to be our haven after the wedding, felt more like entering an unknown future. But the walls I had thought would protect our happiness started to feel like prison bars, which created the foundation for continuous conflict inside the family. My mother-in-law, Betty's quiet infiltration began with her numerous unannounced visits and constant criticism. This resulted in a stunning announcement that she would be moving in with us permanently and occupying the comfortable reading nook I loved so much. I looked helplessly at Tyler, thinking he would defend our personal space, and my heart fell. With trembling emotion in my voice, I took Tyler aside. "Tyler, this is our house. Isn't it better that we discussed this before coming to this conclusion?" He looked back at me, but it seemed as though the warmth and affection that had been in his eyes only months earlier had disappeared. "Betty, Mom is growing older." His emphasis on family made me feel left out as he reasoned that she shouldn't be alone and should instead be with her family. "So I'm not?" I questioned, my eyes welling with tears and hurting. "You understand that's not my intention," he answered in an irritated tone. "But my mother has given me so much. I owe this to her." "What about what we owe each other?" I retaliated. "Tyler, we recently got married. We should be using this time to develop as a team, not to please your mother." But my requests appeared to be ignored. It was a unilateral decision that rendered my thoughts, feelings, and sense of place meaningless. After Betty moved in, their relationship, which had once been based on love, became a hotbed of resentment and egos. Her imposing presence made every room feel claustrophobic. The intimate times I used to spend with Tyler, as well as the serene spots where I used to read, were now gone. I discovered that I was fighting for my own identity, dignity, and peace of mind, in addition to trying to keep my marriage intact and get back my house. I couldn't help but wonder, how did this happen? How did my decisions and life end up being subordinated to the whims of others? My once peaceful reading nook was overrun by Betty's possessions. Her criticisms took center stage in the kitchen, and my husband, the man I had assumed I would spend my life with, became a stranger who supported the opposition, and that was just the start. Life was difficult before, but nothing compared to the nightmare that followed. The atmosphere at home became more and more oppressive, like I could feel the walls closing in around me. The sight of 2 blue lines on a pregnancy test in my shaking hands should have been a happy moment, a treasured occasion, but instead, it was just another example of the mounting strain. However, given these circumstances, the overwhelming reality of our household life seemed to eclipse the news of my first pregnancy. With reddened eyes from restraining tears, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and realized that the pregnancy milestone had turned into a heavy weight. Tyler responded with a disappointingly apathetic response when I told him the news. "Well, that's something," he said, swiftly changing the subject to his mother's suggested home renovation. But Betty welcomed my pregnancy as though it were a heavenly calling. She began dictating everything, including what I should eat and do every day. Her intervention didn't stop at advice when I was supposed to give delivery in the hospital. She used my pregnancy as yet another arena in which to flex her psychological power. "You're eating again?" she would ask, glancing at the little sandwich I had made. "Shouldn't you be careful about gaining weight during pregnancy?" Trying not to lose my cool, I shot back, "This is doctor-recommended, Betty." She sneered. "These days, doctors are ignorant. We knew how to handle pregnancies back when I was a child." My vitality began to fade as the weeks went by, but Betty's demands increased. She made my house into her kingdom, treating me like a servant rather than an expectant daughter-in-law, ordering me to cook, clean, and attend to her every need. She would yell from her self-appointed throne in my former reading nook, which was now her hideout for daytime TV viewing and incessant phone scrolling. "Betty, why haven't you vacuumed the living room yet?" "Betty, I've been feeling quite exhausted today. The physician recommended me to rest," I said, my voice brimming with fatigue. "Tiredness during pregnancy isn't an illness, you know," she retorted. Tyler remained silent throughout it all, his acquiescence to the situation creating further stress. Betty's criticism of my baby name choices during a heated dinner brought the whole thing to a breaking point. A child with that name would be absurd. She scoffed. "You might as well put a kick me sign on his back for the rest of his school career." I retaliated angrily, saying, "Enough is enough, Betty. I get to decide how to raise this child since it's mine." Her voice became more intense, and her eyes lit up with rage. At last, Tyler stepped in, but not in my favor. "Betty, you seem very sentimental." Looking from Tyler to Betty, and then around the house that had become my jail, he continued, "Mom's just giving her opinion." I felt completely alone, degraded, and imprisoned. I could hardly recognize the reflection in my tarnished wedding ring. It was a lady who was slowly losing everything that had once made her unique. I had previously loved my house, my honor, and my will to keep going. Nevertheless, the pressure of ongoing combat steadily undermined such ideals. During one such family meeting, Betty looked me in the eyes and said, "Maybe you shouldn't be a part of this family if you can't handle a simple family discussion." Her tone was triumphant and chilly. At that moment, Tyler's silence was unbearable, cutting through me more deeply than any uttered words could have ever imagined. I was instantly aware that my nightmare was not only coming, it had already engulfed me, transforming my life into a confusing maze of suppressed tears and broken dreams. I wandered through the house like a ghost, where each room echoed the absence of the warmth it once held. The baby growing inside me became my sole beacon of hope, the last shred of joy in a life that felt increasingly hollow. Yet even this small solace was under threat. The breaking point arrived on a frigid evening during one of those dreadful family dinners, which were always thick with tension. I had labored for hours over a meal, anticipating Betty's inevitable criticism. Each of her critiques struck like a sharp jab. Every scoff felt like a slap. I'd braced myself for her usual disparagement, but this time her words cut deeper than ever. "You think you're fit to be a mother if you can't even manage a household. What are you going to do with a baby?" Betty sneered, each word a piercing attack on my already fragile self-esteem. My hands shook, and tears blurred my vision. But before I could respond, Tyler chimed in, solidifying my despair. "Mom has a point, Betty. You need to step it up. We're going to be parents soon." That was the last straw. A surge of anger mixed with years of accumulated resentment and humiliation coursed through me. "Step it up! Step it up!" I exclaimed, my voice filled with a fierce intensity that even I hadn't expected. "I am carrying our child, managing our house, and enduring relentless emotional abuse from your mother, and you tell me to step it up." Both Tyler and Betty looked taken aback by the force of my outburst. At that moment, the reality of my situation was stark and unyielding, laying bare the profound isolation and disrespect I faced daily within what was supposed to be the sanctuary of my own home. The tension inside me had built up like a dormant volcano, and finally it erupted. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore," I declared, my voice breaking under the strain. "I won't raise my child in a place where their mother is treated like nothing. If this is what family is to you, then I want no part of it." With those words, I left the dinner table, leaving Tyler and Betty in stunned silence. I quickly packed a small bag, my hands shaking so much that I struggled with the simple action of turning the door knob. It was then that Betty decided to strike what she thought would be her final blow. "Where do you think you're going? This is Tyler's house, not yours," she sneered. I turned to face her, meeting her gaze firmly. "Actually, Betty, this house is mine. I bought it, and I have every right to decide who stays and who leaves." "Betty, don't do this. Let's talk about it," Tyler implored, his voice desperate, finally grasping the gravity of the situation. "There's nothing left to talk about," I replied, tears streaming down my cheeks as I opened the door to the cold night outside. As I stepped out, I felt the finality of the moment. The door closing behind me seemed to signify the end of a prolonged tragic chapter in my life. I started walking. Each step away from that house was painful yet necessary. I didn't know where I was headed, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of agency over my fate. Despite the high emotional cost, the icy wind cut through my thin clothes as I wandered the deserted streets, the cold biting into my skin as sharply as the turmoil inside me. I walked, lost in a daze of emotional and physical exhaustion, until I nearly reached my parents' house, a haven I desperately needed. Just steps away from safety, my foot caught on an uneven slab of pavement, sending me tumbling to the ground. My ankle twisted in pain. The physical pain was sharp, but it paled in comparison to the emotional pain I was enduring. Limping and tearful, I finally made it to my parents' doorstep. Their shocked expressions upon opening the door mirrored the severity of my ordeal. This breakdown was a long overdue fracture in a life that had already endured too many pressures. As they hurried me to the hospital, I was painfully aware that changes were necessary. I couldn't return to that house, not to Tyler, and certainly not to a life overshadowed by Betty's oppressive presence. Reaching my breaking point wasn't just the end. It marked a new beginning, a harsh but essential step toward regaining the life that had been slowly stripped away from me. Hospital rooms, with their sterile walls and the constant beeping of machines, have a stark way of thrusting reality upon you. Lying there with my sprained ankle propped up and undergoing checks for any complications from the fall, I experienced a blend of relief and fear. My parents stood by, their faces a mix of concern and quiet anger about the ordeal I had endured. They had always sensed something was amiss in my marriage, but the full extent of its dysfunction was now glaringly obvious. "Sweetheart, what are you going to do now?" my mom asked, breaking the heavy silence. Her voice was laden with concern. "I don't know, Mom," I responded. "But what I do know is that I can't go back. Not now. Not ever." My voice was surprisingly steady. My dad, who had been pacing back and forth, stopped and faced me. "Your mother and I will support whatever decision you make, but you need to think about your future and the future of your child," he advised. I nodded, my mind already a labyrinth of potential scenarios, each filled with uncertainty, but also flecked with the promise of newfound freedom. As we spoke, my phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Betty, where are you? We need to talk." Without hesitation, I turned off my phone. Whatever Tyler had to say, it was too little, too late. I was done with discussions. It was time for actions that spoke louder than any words could. My first act was a decisive one. I called a family lawyer. With my parents beside me, we discussed divorce proceedings, child custody, and alimony. There was a chillingly clinical aspect to dissecting a failed relationship in legal terms, but it also filled me with a sense of empowerment. For the first time, I was taking control of my life, making decisions that prioritized my well-being and that of my unborn child. A week later, Tyler and Betty were served with divorce papers. This step wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about reclaiming my independence and laying the groundwork for a future where I could breathe freely, unencumbered by the shadows of a toxic relationship. Along with the divorce papers, my lawyer filed a notice of eviction against Tyler and Betty from the house that was legally mine. Additionally, the paperwork included demands for substantial child support payments and compensation for the emotional turmoil I had endured. These measures were severe, yet essential, a firm severance of the toxic ties that had bound me for too long. When I eventually turned my phone back on, it was flooded with messages and missed calls from Tyler. "Betty, please can we talk about this?" I didn't realize how bad things had gotten. One message read, followed by another. "I'm sorry, Betty. I never wanted any of this to happen. Let's find a way to make it right." For a moment, I was tempted to respond to hear him out, but then memories of the countless nights filled with humiliation, years of emotional neglect, and Betty's relentless cruelty, all tacitly condoned by him, resurfaced. Any lingering affection was now buried beneath the debris of our shattered marriage. Resolutely, I deleted the messages, erased his number, and blocked him on all social media platforms. Tyler was now just another part of my history, a traumatic story I was ready to put to rest. I knew that the journey ahead would not be without difficulties. Divorce cases are naturally complicated, especially if children are involved. But I felt like I was in charge of my future for the first time in a very long time. Although it was a difficult voyage, it guided me away from the devouring darkness and into an uncertain but promising better future. The courtroom had that certain cold, impersonal feel to it that characterizes spaces where fortunes and lives are made or broken in an instant. Sitting next to me was my lawyer, who looked confident and had a pile of documents ready. My parents' moral support was evident behind me. Tyler was sitting across the room, looking defeated and bewildered, while Betty was sitting next to him, her countenance a mask of indignant disbelief. The BFF said, "All rise," and Judge Anthony walked in. The dissolution of the marriage happened in a blur. Evidence of Tyler's neglect and Betty's abusive behavior was given to the court, exposing lies and laying bare a flurry of facts and accusations. I watched as their faces twisted, maybe realizing for the first time that they were being observed by the authorities. The seriousness of the matter enveloped the courtroom as the judge spoke to Betty. "Ms., you are being accused of harassment and emotional abuse. The amount of evidence used against you is substantial. How would you implore?" Betty stumbled, not the confident person she usually was. There was a hint of desperation in her response. "This has all been taken out of context, Your Honor. I was just concerned about my son's welfare." The judge swiftly responded, "It seems your definition of well-being is quite twisted," showing that he was not impressed. Following a succinct but thorough assessment, Judge Anthony rendered the decision. Betty and Tyler are officially divorced by the court. The only person who will be granted custody of the unborn kid is Betty. "Tyler, you must make the state-mandated child support payments. Mrs. Betty, you are subject to a $300,000 fine due to the substantial proof of your emotional abuse and harassment." As the gavel fell, I felt a sense of relief, but it was a bittersweet victory. Rather than ending in fiery arguments, my marriage had ended with a peaceful exchange of divorce decrees. It was more expensive than I could have ever imagined, but I was free. Tyler came up to me on my wedding day as we were leaving the courtroom. His look was one of remorse mixed with perplexity. "I'm very sorry, Betty. I never imagined we would end up here," he said in a somber tone. When I looked at him, the man I thought I would live a lifetime with, all I felt was emptiness where love used to be. "Tyler, I didn't believe so either, yet here we are," I said. "It's too late to apologize now," as I turned to face him and started to go away. As I walked by, Betty tried to look up at me, maybe looking for approval or maybe forgiveness, but I gave her none. She'd taken too much out of me. I could not give her the gratification of knowing that I was still affected by her. The world appeared lighter and more colorful as soon as I left the courthouse, as though I was viewing everything through a different prism. It felt like a new chapter, one that I would write on my terms, free from the continual shroud of dread and emotional upheaval. With tears in her eyes, my mother gave me a strong embrace. "Betty, you succeeded. You're at liberty." I gave her a big, heartfelt embrace in return. "I couldn't have gone through this without you and Dad." With each other, we stepped into the fresh light of a new day, prepared to go forward and let go of the past. My dad joined in the group hug and stated, "We'll always be here for you," in a steady, comforting voice, "and for your new beginning." That night, as I sat by myself in the silence of my home, which was now unquestionably mine, I experienced a deep sense of calm. I was alone, yet I didn't feel lonely. I had to live up to my own expectations for the first time in a long time. I was still a little nervous about the difficulties that were ahead since, well, I was going to become a single mother, which is a really demanding duty. However, as I put my palm on my abdomen and felt the soft movements of my unborn child, I had a peaceful, certain feeling descend upon me. This harrowing voyage had forced me to face some important truths. Even while the scars from the past were still there, they now told a story of survival rather than failure. I was prepared for whatever was ahead, not out of need, but rather a state of will. Making the decision to take control of my life and determine my own fate was crucial. It was the prospect of a fresh start, one filled with resiliency, optimism, and just discovered independence.
My name is Nancy. I'm 35 and I work at an office. I currently live in the family home with my spouse, Matthew, and his mother. Even though I'm married, my mother-in-law's persistent bullying made our relationship miserable and never seemed to get better. When Matthew and I initially started working together, our companies were partners, so we frequently collaborated on projects. Our connection grew stronger as we spent more time together, and we started going on dates and eating out. Matthew proposed to me after a year of dating, and at the age of 32, we were married. We were simply the two of us in our happy marriage at first, and I didn't know the real Matthew. Because we both had successful occupations, we could afford to have opulent weekends filled with travel and fine meals. I saw a bright future full of treasured memories. But when Matthew's father tragically passed away 3 years after we were married, things changed drastically. Matthew, overcome with sorrow, proposed that we take up residence with his mother. I was surprised at the suggestion. We'd only been married for 3 years. And while I felt sorry for my mother-in-law, I also treasured our independence as a pair. My mother-in-law and I had a bad relationship after these things happened. Our living condition became intolerable as a result of her continuing to abuse me harshly. She surprised me by giving me divorce papers and said that it would be better for everyone if Matthew and I split up. Feeling confused and upset, I made the decision to take a break and spent a month staying with my parents in order to collect my thoughts and consult my father. I made the painful decision to file for divorce during my stay. My decision was obvious, but my mother-in-law quickly started phoning me non-stop to ask for my forgiveness and own up to her sins. It was a very difficult time in my life, one that made me reassess my relationships and my path to happiness. I discovered the value of establishing limits and putting my well-being first, despite pressure from my family while navigating these rough seas. After his father passed away, my husband Matthew showed a strong desire to remain with his mother, particularly since he is her only son. He had a strong sense of duty to look after her. "I'm her only son, so I feel like I need to take care of her as much as I can," he told me. His regret for not paying more attention to his father prior to his passing heightened his feeling of obligation. I had my doubts about Matthew's decision to move home with his mother, but I felt obligated to support him since I saw how devastated he was by his father's passing. My mother-in-law was relieved to see us when we arrived at her home shortly after. She replied to Matthew, "It's good of you to be here," and he comforted her, telling her that she didn't need to worry anymore now that they were here. She replied with gratitude, saying, "Dear, thank you. I'll look after the two of you going forward." Matthew was grateful for what she said, but when it came to me, I felt uneasy. Once we were settled in, Matthew and I went to the living room to see my mother-in-law, who had made some sweets from her bakery using her favorite almond paste. As he appreciated the snacks, Matthew's eyes lit up with a youthful enthusiasm that made me momentarily participate in his happiness. But when my mother-in-law asked me, "Nancy, are you all right?" and turned to face me with a cold expression, the mood changed. "How come you appear so lost?" Then she advised briskly that we prepare coffee to go with the pastries. "Where are the coffee pots and things?" she said snidely as I was scrambling to determine the location of items. "You really are so worthless, don't you?" "Oh gee, they're over there where the wife's stuff is," she said, gesturing to a cluttered shelf and generating more clutter in the process. Her tone was contemptuous. Her remark hurt, especially because it was baseless. Even though I'd never shied away from a task, she seemed intent to portray me in a negative light. This exchange made me question our decision to move in because it served as a clear reminder of the difficult dynamics in the home. My spouse and I used to frequently visit his mother before we lived in together. She would always say, "No need, just sit down," which essentially prevented me from going into the kitchen whenever I tried to help around the house. It appeared that she had certain preferences for how things were done, and that she didn't want outside interference. I eventually gave up trying to help, believing that it would diffuse the situation. But that didn't make things any better. Even so, it felt unjust that she would still lash out at me without warning. Once, following an especially harsh reprimand from Mom, she gave me a fierce look and said, "What's up with that look? Are you having issues?" I prayed in silence that my husband would step in, not wanting to answer directly and start a fight. I looked at him, expecting he would offer some consolation, but he seemed engrossed in his phone, as if he didn't realize how uncomfortable his mother was making me feel. That he didn't appear to notice, let alone handle the situation, was painful and disappointing. This conflict was just the start of our difficult living situation. After moving in, the problems became more common almost immediately. She stormed into our room early one morning, saying, "Hey Nancy, why are you still sleeping in?" It was barely 6 a.m. when I looked at my phone. With a little confusion, I answered, "It's only 6 o'clock in the morning," she shot back, unfazed. "So what? Not only should you get up and prepare Matthew's lunch and breakfast, but you also have a daily bathroom cleaning to attend to." I was surprised by her expectations. My spouse and I didn't usually cook lunch since we weren't early risers and frequently skipped breakfast. It was also unrealistic to clean the bathroom before leaving for work because it would be too tiring. It seemed excessive and unrealistic to expect one to wake up early in order to finish all of these responsibilities. My mother-in-law became more agitated, doubting my abilities and upbringing, while I dreaded answering her early morning requests. "Why do you simply stand there? Move quickly. What type of upbringing caused you to lose all of your usefulness?" Her scathing remarks pierced me deeply and filled me with a mixture of determination and rage. I made the decision to live up to her expectations in return. I started getting up at 6 every morning after that, and started making more complex breakfast and lunch dishes for my spouse and me, in addition to simple ones. In addition, I made sure the restroom was spotless. I was surprised to discover that I felt somewhat satisfied about keeping the bathroom tidy, and it was satisfying to keep a clean environment. My spouse was aware of my efforts and frequently thanked me for the meals and the tidy environment. However, my mother-in-law's attitude did not improve with my increased efforts. Instead, her demands escalated. One day, she would crave Japanese cuisine, only to switch to French the next, insisting on dishes like homemade pizza and freshly cooked pasta paired with red wine from upscale shops. These requests were delivered as if each meal were for a special occasion, yet they were becoming a daily expectation. The most frustrating aspect was that my husband seemed to always side with her, instructing me to adhere strictly to his mother's wishes. "Make sure you do it exactly how my mom wants," he'd say without offering to help. He completely disengaged from the tasks, leaving everything up to me. Consequently, our precious days off were consumed with preparing elaborate dinners for his mother. Moreover, she continued to critique my life choices relentlessly. "You're a wife. Why are you still working? You should be at home supporting your husband. Plus, you're getting older, and the time to have children is running out. Do you realize you're almost worthless?" she would assert daily. Her words were not only demanding, but deeply hurtful, causing me to reflect on her character and wonder about the kind of upbringing that shaped such a harsh personality. Her constant criticisms made me question the sustainability of living under constant scrutiny and pressure. One particularly stressful day, compounded by work and ongoing tension with my mother-in-law, my husband confronted me with an accusation. "My mom says you're neglecting the housework. Is that true? You never listen to me and always act defiantly. I used to appreciate the lunches you made every day, but now it's all frozen food. Do you believe what your mom says?" Of course I believe her. Why wouldn't I? Are you suggesting my mom is lying? You're acting terribly as a wife. Can't you fulfill your role properly? He snapped at me, his tone sharp and accusatory. I was livid at his lack of understanding and support. "What are you talking about? Just look for yourself. I make homemade lunches, clean, do laundry, and cook dinner every day," I protested, my frustration mounting. "I'm telling you to stop lying. What Mom says is true," Matthew retorted, dismissing my efforts blatantly. "You're acting crazy. You mama's boy, what are you even saying? You never believe me or help me with anything. What exactly do you want me to do? You're such a nuisance," I retorted as the argument escalated quickly. Matthew's face flushed with anger as he responded. The exchange marked a significant deterioration in our relationship. From that day forward, the situation at home grew even more challenging. Whenever my mother-in-law criticized or harassed me, Matthew began to echo her insults. "Hey, is dinner ready? I just got home. Hurry up," my husband demanded one evening as soon as he walked through the door. "You're so slow and useless," my mother-in-law added, her words like daggers. While they both berated me, I muttered under my breath, "You're both failures." Exhausted and feeling isolated, I was left behind as they decided to go out to eat together. "Never mind. Let's just go out to eat together," my husband suggested abruptly. "That sounds good. Let's go," my mother-in-law agreed enthusiastically. As they left, I was completely excluded from the outing, a clear sign of how disconnected I had become from what was supposed to be my family. Each day, I endured insults and belittlement from both of them, pushing me to question the viability of staying in such a marriage. Was enduring this relentless negativity worth it? That's when life handed me an unexpected chance to change everything. As I pondered this new opportunity, I realized I didn't have to endure the toxic environment with my husband and mother-in-law any longer. Their usual taunts continued unabated. "You're worthless as a daughter-in-law. I can't fathom how my son ended up marrying you," my mother-in-law scolded, with my husband smirking alongside her. Seizing the moment, I stood up, my resolve firm. "I'm going back to my parents' house for a month," I announced. They both stared at me, their faces a mix of surprise and anger. "What about the house? What if there's a fire?" my husband exclaimed in panic. "You're being incredibly irresponsible. If you're leaving, then divorce my son," my mother-in-law shouted, her anger palpable as she yanked a drawer open and pulled out divorce papers, thrusting them at me. "Go ahead, sign them," she challenged. "Oh, Mom, you're prepared for this," my husband remarked, clearly surprised. "That's right. You have no choice but to obey us. If you don't like it, then get a divorce. This is a convenient situation," my mother-in-law asserted, convinced of her control. To their surprise, I gave them a firm response. "Okay, let's get divorced then." Their shocked eyebrows widened at my hard position, but I chose to ignore it and started completing the divorce paperwork. "I've completed my contribution. Kindly depart promptly," I said in a firm voice. My spouse blinked in shock, unable to make sense of the lady in front of him and the one he believed he could easily control. "Was that earlier just a bluff?" he murmured, not understanding that I was actually taking back my freedom and life. Matthew's behavior changed significantly when I insisted on completing the divorce. He gave me a scathing glance. "Don't fumble around." "I'm serious," I declared, my resolve unwavering. Matthew grabbed the divorce papers out of my hand without saying another word and quickly filled in his portion. He forcefully placed the papers onto the table. With a sour tone, he questioned, "Is this good enough?" "It's too late to undo it, even if you want to." "Oh well, this means it's over for you too," he exclaimed, attempting to laugh icily while trying to hide his dismay. "It's over for you guys in my heart," my mother-in-law added. However, I told myself, it's really over for you. Immediately upon my departure, I filed the divorce paperwork. When I got back to my parents' house, I told my father everything that had happened. He was really surprised and assured me that he would help me take whatever required action. My mother-in-law started phoning all the time a month later. "Hi there, you. What are your desires?" In a cold tone, I replied, "Now that we're strangers, don't say that, please." "Matthew and I find ourselves in a challenging circumstance," she begged, sounding phony. "Oh, really?" I curtly said. "You must find that difficult." She gave a predictable, snarky reaction. "I haven't made a statement yet. I would prefer to hang up now. I want to end the call." I pushed, desperate to unplug. "Hold on. I need to ask for a favor." Her voice was urgent as she begged, "Can you talk to your father?" "After everything you and Matthew have done for me, why should I?" I fired back. "I apologize for that." In an attempt to patch things up, she said, "I didn't realize that your father's company is an important business partner of the company Matthew works for. It came out that my father conducted business with Matthew's company while running a prosperous enterprise. We had undoubtedly talked about this before we were married, but my father-in-law wasn't well at the time, so maybe my mother-in-law didn't feel like she needed to be involved in those conversations. It seemed odd that Matthew didn't recall, but maybe he had forgotten while defending his mother and criticizing me. In response to my father's decision to end the business relationship, Matthew's employer offered to extend the contract by firing Matthew, which cost him his job. This shift in events highlighted the fallout from their deeds and the entwined fates that my departure had initiated. It turned out that Matthew had big plans to renovate our family house in preparation for our long-term cohabitation. He had taken out a sizable debt to pay for these upgrades. But because of his recent layoff, it was almost hard for him to manage the loan installments. I had been paying my fair portion of our living expenses as an employee of the company up until our divorce, which helped us stay afloat financially. Now that the divorce was finalized, Matthew and my mother-in-law were in a vulnerable position. "Matthew, why did you feel the need to modify the house to flaunt your status?" In the middle of their financial difficulties, I couldn't help but think, "You're so proud, just like your mother." With a desperate tone, my mother-in-law called out to me. She begged, "Please help me." "I apologize for my errors," she said, sounding feeble and devoid of her customary assertiveness. I firmly said, "I'm sorry, but I can't forgive you for what you've done. It's useless if you're expecting me to assist you. Find a job instead, even if it's only temporary. I'm going to end this talk now, because I think it's a waste of time." I ended the conversation and made the decision to permanently ban their numbers. I found out later that Matthew's mother was forced to sell the house because they were unable to make the mortgage payments. The house was rather new and could have easily provided my mother-in-law with a comfortable retirement. It's unfortunate that their needless luxury and bad money management contributed to such a waste. My ex-husband eventually moved to an apartment on an island where he now works part-time. This abrupt shift in their situation brought to light the ramifications of their behavior and the effect of our broken relationships. Even though they now rely on my mother-in-law's pension to get by, I've been getting ready for a big transition in my own life. I made the decision to remain with my parents till I left, rather than immediately getting a new house. I will treasure every second I have left with them till I relocate abroad, since this time is very valuable to me. I'm excited and full of hope about making a fresh start in a new nation. Even though I've had issues in the past with my mother-in-law and ex-husband, I have hope for the future. Although I don't understand why they treated me badly, I'm glad I broke things off. I might even find a fantastic spouse and look into the possibilities of getting married abroad during this new chapter in my life. I sincerely hope that my mother-in-law and ex-husband may find pleasure in whatever they choose to do in the future. I appreciate you following along, and if you enjoyed it, please think about becoming a channel subscriber. As I start this amazing trip, I'm looking forward to sharing more updates and anecdotes with you.